is Dr. Gigi Sabbat, and you're listening to the Walk With Me podcast. My guest today is Nellie Harden. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Such an honor to have you here today. Now, why don't you start off by telling us more about you and where are you from, Nellie?
Well, I am from the Midwest in the United States, but I am currently living in North Carolina, very East Coast. Like I can walk to the ocean in my neighborhood. So yeah, my husband and I and our 4 daughters, who are all between 15 and 19 years old, all live here. And it has been a beautiful transformation to come this way. And we moved here about 10 years ago. Honestly, just for quality of life. Everyone was like, why are you moving? Is it work? Is it this? We're like, nope, just because we feel more calm and settled and at ease and feel like we're supposed to belong out there. And that's why we moved out here. But a little bit about me. My background is in biology and psychology. I am an avid lifelong learner of anything and everything to do with disciplines. So family disciplines, faith disciplines, leadership, self-growth, personal growth. All of that is where I just dive into every day, and then I get to pour out onto others. And the primary work I do is working with families that are raising young women or with people that are leading young women today in their first 6,570 days, which is how many days are in 18 years. And so that is where I primarily have my work in helping them build foundations of worth, esteem, and confidence in them before they leave home.
I love it. Now, tell us a little bit more about parenting and family. What do both of them mean to you?
Everything. Goodness. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I have 4 daughters that are between 15 and 19. And, for me, growing up, I lost my dad really young. And then, mom got remarried and had my brother and sister. And then I graduated high school early to go off to college. And, I did not have a bad childhood by any means, but it was just kind of tumultuous. And there was a lot of reactionary points there. And when I left to go off to college, which was 7 hours away from home, I really did not have a foundation within myself, and I would not have been able to tell you that back then at all, of worth, esteem, and confidence. And when women especially, but young men as well, but when young women especially are released out into the world without this foundation, then we end up chasing worth anywhere and everywhere that we can find it, whether that is in grades, relationships, accolades, sports, you name it. We chase that down to no avail, because as soon as, it's like chasing a ghost. As soon as we chase it, then it wasn't good enough and we have to go further, right? And that is what happened to me my freshman year of college. And it really took me down some really dark, dangerous corridors that then I I shut down from. My life just kind of shut down from. And then that started decades long healing cycle that I've been on. But in the midst of that, here I am, given 4 beautiful daughters within 4 years, after going through an infertility, roller coaster of a few years. Then the pendulum swung way the other way. And then I had 4, daughters in 4 years. And we almost lost my husband right after my youngest was born. And so here I am sitting in a hospital room and a waiting room, actually. And we didn't know if he was going to make it or not. And I have a 4-year-old, 2 2-year-olds, and a newborn. And I was just so overcome with, I have a job to do, right? And especially at that time, it was, this might need to be my solo job. So I really have a job to do. Thankfully, my husband is still here and we are good. And he is good, but that's really when it just hit me like a ton of bricks of, I have a job to do. I have 6,570 days to do it, minus some. I did have a 4-year-old at the time, right? Let's go. How does this actually get built? Because people tell you all the time about worth and about esteem and say you have it or don't and all of this, but I wanted to figure out how I actually could build it and help others build it as well. And that's what I've been able to do.
Wow, that's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us, Nellie.
Yeah.
Now, Nellie, how does a parent's own story play into their parenting and create generational trends?
It is so powerful because we have our own story. We had our own 65, 70, right? That period of our childhood. And that is during massive brain development time. So tracks are being laid, if you will, during our 65, 70. So those habits, those hurts, those go-tos are all being laid during that time. And then we inadvertently, when we become parents, we start just laying out those tracks again and going down those common roads. So something I really encourage parents to do is, before you have kids or even afterwards, or if you have a 17-year-old, it's okay, but sit down and say, what do I want my child to leave childhood with, and what do I want them not to leave childhood with, right? And a lot of that not category is going to have to do with your own childhood and things that you've brought in that you don't want to pass on. And once you recognize that, put a name to it, you can really start to heal on your own, be vulnerable and open to that healing, and then you can walk forward together. So yes, there's so much that comes into your parenting from your own childhood, but awareness and then vulnerability is key in order to not pass on that generational pain and truly be an elbow in your family story.
I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure to write that down. Awareness and vulnerability. Very
Mm.
powerful. Now let's talk a little bit about parenting. What is your favorite part about parenting, Nellie?
Oh, goodness. I am immersed in adolescent young women right now. I have them in my home. I work with them in our local community, and I work with them around the world. And so, what I really love to see is when those moments of accountability, and then turning away from whatever it is they were walking toward, and turning away from that. I had a beautiful moment last night with a student, not one of my kids, but another student that was walking towards something not healthy for her and not healthy for others. And she was like, that's not where I want to go. And I want to turn around from that. And I'm going to need help doing that. Awesome. Let's do that. And a few weeks ago, too, there was a young woman who is in a relationship that is not serving her, and it is really doing a lot of harm. And she was like, I don't know, I'm really pulled toward this, but I also know it's not healthy for me, and that's okay. And helping them realize it is not a magic button. It is not an easy button, right? You're going to go through hard things to go from the wrong to the right, or the more wrong to the more right for you, and I will be here for you in that. You are not alone. If we're going to go get lunch every day, let's go do that. If you need a text message every morning, tell me what you need, and I will provide that. And let's go through this together. So helping them see this is a problem, right? They're so distracted right now. The world is so amped up on so many negative emotions and silos of truth and all of these things, right? So helping them just come to actualizations in reality, having accountability, and then walking with them through the transition that they need in order to get to a healthier place. That's a beautiful thing to witness, and an even more beautiful thing to be a part of.
Wow, I love it. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Now, is there a difference between raising a boy or raising a girl? Tell us a little bit more.
Oh, there is a huge difference. It's so funny. And I was actually just writing about this not too long ago. And it doesn't matter who I'm talking to, what if they're a man or a woman, boy or girl, age, what have you. When I say I have 4 kids and then they're like, oh, boys, girls, I'm like, all girls. There's this, it's like every single time. And then the next follow up without fail is, oh, I feel bad for your husband, right? Because he's in a house of 5 women, and I was like, and my husband has always, played it off. He's like, nope, just more women to take care of me. It's all good and all this stuff. But yes, there is a huge difference between raising a young man and raising a young woman. So just brain wise, right? There is very different brains between a young man and a young woman, between a man and a woman, period. How just some quick examples are how our emotional and mental processes happen. In a woman, our memories flow through our emotional centers It does not in a man. So this is where, your daughter comes home from school and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you're like, hey, how are you? And they're like, oh, I'm fine. And then you're like, oh, so, what happened today? Well, in first hour, this happened and I was so sad and I was so mad. And you're like, where did this mess come from? But women relive the emotions along with the memories. And so this can be particularly wonderful in some ways when we sit and we think about those memories and all my husband and I renew our vows every 10 years. And so, I think about those and I'm like, I can really truly be there and I can sense what's going on and all of the emotions that came with that. But also, if there is trauma or drama that is happening, we can spike our cortisol levels on this cycle going up and down all day long as we are remembering and going through those emotions again. So that's a quick example. And the other one I want to bring up, because I think this is so pertinent today, is how COVID actually affected young women versus young men. And I'm not talking about the illness. I'm talking about the shutdown. And there's been several actually, but there was a most recent study that came out of the West Coast, and they studied through fMRIs. They did the images before and after COVID. Now, of course, they didn't know COVID was coming, so their research was set on course to do something else. The shutdown happened. They're like, well, we have all of these images, so we will now change the purpose of what we're doing them for. And what they found was remarkable. So the cortical layer of the brain is the gray tissue on the outside, and it thins with age, and it doesn't regain its thickness. So it correlates very well with age. Well, what they found is that in young men, they had a 1.2 year acceleration in aging during the COVID shutdown. And this was for young men and women between 9 and 19. They had a 1.2 year acceleration. Well, young women had a 4.2 year acceleration in aging during that time. And if you looked at just the places of the brain that were affected, in young men, it was 1, sometimes 2 places of the brain. In women, it was over 30 places in the brain, both hemispheres, all lobes. And so it really, the way our brains are very different. The way we are culturally is very different. The, faith that we, and responsibilities we have is very different. So raising a young man and raising a young woman are 2 totally different things. But there's so much variety within there. I call all 4 of my girls 4 corners of a square. They're very different young women. So there's variety within the women and within the men as well.
Wow, absolutely incredible. And I did see there that we did receive a comment as well. It says, hello, LinkedIn family. And thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. Now, Nellie, you mentioned trauma. Let's circle back to that for a moment and address trauma. Now, what age do you believe is best to discuss trauma with your children if you are aware of the trauma your children have faced?
There is no blanket statement for that, honestly. It is a real individual based assessment that you would have to take on that. And it also depends on the degree of trauma that happened, the subject of trauma that happened, right? I mean, I've been around individuals that had massive trauma when they were below 1 year old that they are still living out and having effects of when they are teenagers. Between 12 to 19 years old. And that is difficult because they don't remember in their conscious brain what happened, but their brain was affected by that trauma, and then you're living out the effects of it later. I mean, in a small way, well, not in a small way. My daughter, when she was 2, she drowned in my in-laws' pool and had a near drowning accident. I say that, but she really did drown. She was gone. We brought her back. I gave her CPR, hospitals, a year of neuro testing and all of the things, but she doesn't truly remember what happened. And she certainly doesn't remember all of the, therapies that we had to do for the year following. And now that she's 17 years old, there's still some things that, can creep in and creep into her story even sometimes now. But we have an open dialogue about that. Now, when you're talking about something like sexual trauma that might happen, that's a much more deep and darker and personal journey that they need to be able to open up to and be ready to talk about that. It's not something that you can force your way into talk about at all.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I am so sorry to hear about what happened to your daughter in regards to drowning. Good friend of mine who speaks about it openly, unfortunately lost their child to drowning. Yeah. So again, so sorry. My heart truly goes out to you. As far as Christian faith here, let's talk about Christian faith and its role in you raising your children.
Yeah, it really is everything. And I say, so I did not grow up in a Christian home. Neither did my husband. Christian faith did not come into our lives until all of our kids were born, actually. And it was the year that my husband had surgery and my daughter drowned 13 weeks after my husband had his heart surgery. And someone invited us that Christmas Eve. And then we just started getting into how to serve and be the hands and feet. And that was really the door that opened for us, and how to sacrificially love one another and not to live in judgment of one another, right? To have good judgment for myself, to teach my kids how to have good judgment, but not to be in judgment for other people. And to know that above all, that we are called to a higher purpose, we are called to a higher power, and we belong to God. So even out here in the world, when we can walk into a room and people scoff, or when my kids walk into some sort of event at school or something and they don't feel like they belong, they do belong to somebody already. And that is such a stabilizing force and knowing to have, because the pillars of worth, right, are to be seen, heard, loved, belong, and have purpose. And when they can know, I am already seen, heard, loved, belong, and have a great purpose, without the world trying to fill those buckets for me, it changes the perspective on everything. So that's really a huge part of where it comes into parenting and raising, especially adolescents today. It's a harsh world out there.
It's very true and very powerful. Now let's talk a little bit about homeschooling and traditional school. And what are your thoughts on both?
I've done both. And so, I homeschooled for 7 years, and we've done public, we've done private, we've done Montessori, we've done all the things. And it really was just year by year adventure to see what is best for you this year, right? What is best for you this year? And there was sometimes that one of my kids was off at a school and the other 3 were home. And then there was times when, 2 of them were in a private school, one was in a public school, and one was home. So it depends on what is right for that child. And I remember, I was a public school kid through and through. So was my husband. So the idea of homeschooling was so absolutely foreign to me. And I mean, you never would have convinced me, 20 years ago that I would ever homeschool, but there I was. And there was a woman standing outside of the public school my kids were at once. And I was just letting her know, I'm thinking about it. I don't know. And she had homeschooled for a year. It didn't work out for her very well, and she ended up going back. But she told me and gave me great advice. She said, you know what? If it is something you're wondering about, do it and see, because a year is not going to make them or break them, right? And it will be okay as long as you're doing something, right? Not just running around or what have you, but do it and see if it'll work for you. She said, I do not regret it at all. It was a great year. It just wasn't exactly for us. And so we're back, but maybe it is for you, or maybe it's a hybrid-ish situation for you. And so I took her advice and I just tried it, and I saw what we could do. That's the year we happened to move from the Midwest to the East Coast. So it was great timing. And we had so much fun with it. And I say that, but it was also extremely hard. I was not blessed with patience. And my kids know that, and I know that. But it gave me a platform to grow my patience in a way I never would have had before. And we just became so much closer as a family, so much we learned so much together. We had great discussions. Our communication went, through the roof. Being able to have a real discussion about, science or philosophy or English or, World War I or what have you with your 6 and 7-year-old is pretty profound. And that's what I think is missing sometimes when all of my kids are in, I have my oldest is at university, and then my younger 3 are in public school right now. And that's the thing that I do really miss, is being able to have the big discussions about what we're learning together. And now they just come home from school and I have no idea really what they're learning about. And I can ask and they tell me, but I'm not in depth into it to be able to have those, rich conversations. And so we have rich conversations about other things now.
Wow. And you said something so powerful there, to try it, homeschooling. I think that's so powerful, because how do you know if you've never tried it? So thank you so much for that. Try it.
Yeah.
Love it. Awesome. Now you have a quote here. It says, the best way to change the world is through one living room at a time. Tell us a little bit more and why.
Yeah, that is truly where I feel like the power of change happens. And I speak on stages too, and I go and I listen to people on stages, and I think it's powerful and magnetic. But the real change is going to happen when people go home. It is the daily, consistent accountability and pouring in that we have in our kids. And I mean, there's so many times that we see difficult leaders or people that are hurting that then turn around and hurt other people, and it always stems back to how they were raised or something that happened in their childhood that wasn't addressed in a healthy way. And that is where we can affect real change, is in the living rooms at home, each one of us being empowered and equipped to help that child, help the next generation, help them in our youth leader, rooms, help them in our living rooms, help them in these small groups to know them, to truly know them and be able to dive in and then help build their worth and their esteem, which is value and appreciation for self, and their confidence, their true belief in themselves before they launch off into the world. And so, yeah, it is this beauty of the small, intimate gatherings in this small group of, I truly care about you and I love you, and this is what I want to help you with, right? You don't get that from a stage. So.
Wow, that's very powerful. And you mentioned something very powerful again in regards to the childhood and making sure to face it. And because it can affect your life if you don't face it, essentially that trauma that you may have endured when you were a child. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, Nellie, you have authored 2 insightful books. Tell us a little bit more about both.
Yeah, so No Problem Parenting is a collaboration of a group of authors that we came together, and I have a chapter in there, and other authors do too. And it's all about helping manage parenting today, because it can be overwhelming, and it is a book, a collaboration that you can read that covers multiple different topics, and you can get expert advice in, you name it, from sports to faith to I did the pillars of worth and talked in depth about each one of those in there and what to do in these situations. So that was a beautiful collaborative project that I was a part of. And then 40 scriptures and conversations to have when raising daughters is a scriptural journal ebook that I put together last year. It is wonderful. And what it is, it's a scripture that plays into being seen, heard, loved, belong, and purpose. So it's a scripture that ties into that, a discussion prompt that you can then dive in, and journal entry notes and wonderful visuals that go along with everything too. And so those are the 2 that are available right now, and one more on the way.
I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure to check out Nellie's books as well, both of those books. And Thank you so much, Nellie. We appreciate you. Now, Nellie, you mentioned childhood quite a bit, and you talk about trauma quite a bit today.
Mm-hmm.
Did you experience any trauma as a child? And also tell us a little bit more about your childhood.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, my dad died. I was just 9 months old when my dad was in a car accident, and then he was in a coma for 9 months, and then my mom had to take him off of life support when I was 18 months old. And so then it was just the two of us. And as you can imagine, she was completely torn apart from having to take her husband off of life support. His family was very against her taking off of life support. So she really had to stand her ground in that. Even, she has all the doctors saying he's completely brain dead. And she has his family saying, no, that's it. This can't be. We're going to sue you, and all of these things. And it just got really messy, as you can imagine. Everyone loved him and just wanted what was best for him. And it was just a really difficult period. And then it was just my mom and I. We lived in a trailer, which, and we did not have like two pennies to rub together, back then. My mom would tell me about how we didn't have a refrigerator. We just had a styrofoam, like the gas station, old timey coolers, and we would have to go and get the food for that day and put it in there because the ice would melt and we wouldn't have it. And so, I grew up on McDonald's and Denny's and Salisbury steak TV dinners. And it was wonderful as far as, I had so much fun with my mom in that trailer. My best friend lived next door. And so there was beauty in the ashes of everything that was happening. And then, mom met my stepdad, who I also called dad, because they started dating when I was 4, and, had my brother and sister, and we moved around a lot. And so there was that. But like I mentioned, I'm a Christian. I did not know the Lord at all back then. And so I was making very worldly choices, which then led down some difficult pathways. And in that first 8 weeks of college that I went to, I showed up and I knew no one there. I was 7 hours away from home. Mom and dad and brother and sister waved to me goodbye. And as the van left, and any shred of identity that I had built also left with them. And I turn around and my roommate, I roomed blind. Her name was Susie Pop from Florida, and she was this little party girl, and she seemed to know exactly what she was doing. Now looking back, I know it was this, inflated, very surface ego of this is what I do in order to feel empowered, right? And it wasn't healthy for her. It certainly wasn't healthy for me. And, by that night, we were out and we were partying. And that first 8 weeks was deafening and blinding, and so many terrible things happened in there. And then I just stayed. I said, no more. I'm not doing this. They continued to go out. And then I was alienated. I didn't have any, right? I wasn't that girl. I wasn't defined by that anymore. Like I was those first 8 weeks. And so I was left behind, but I would have rather have been left behind than continue in the path that I was on. And it took another 16 years after that 8 weeks to truly come to terms with everything that happened in that 8 weeks and choices that were made. And then another 12 years before I could truly lay it down. For my 45th birthday last year, last October, I sat down and I told my kids everything. And they had, little bits and pieces here and there, but I was like, you can probably see why I might parent the way I do, going back to our previous conversation, right? Why I might protect in the way I do, why I might guide in the way I do, because this is the path that I took, and it practically destroyed me. And it's taken me decades to build myself to where I am now. And I don't want to see you waste all that time like I had to. And so, yeah, your traumas that you have and your story completely shape your life.
Wow, that's very true. And thank you for being transparent and letting us know the trauma that you faced as a child. I too experienced trauma in my childhood. I was sexually assaulted by two individuals when I was 8 years old.
Mm.
So I agree with you. I believe that we must continue to raise awareness and educate others about trauma.
Absolutely. And when we don't, it just puts you back in a shame box, right? And uh, part of the way a woman's brain works too, going back to the woman and man conversation we were having earlier about brains, is that the neurotransmitters that we have in our brains work and are processed very differently than in a man's brain. And it also is what part of what helps us hold on to grudges. It helps us hold on to grief and pain and trauma and guilt and shame. All of that we tend to hold on to more because of the way our brains are formed. Now, it can also be part of our superpower, right? We can hold on to joy and gratitude and all of the good things longer and deeper and more powerful as well. I mean, we weren't meant to go through trauma. That is not what we were meant to do in this life. It's just part of the broken world that we live in. So yeah, it's difficult, but bringing awareness to it helps people come out of the darkness and into the light. And I have found that over and over and over again. The more that you bring your traumas and your dramas into the light, the less power they have over you.
Agreed. Hold on to gratitude. Very powerful, Nellie. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, you did receive another comment here. It says, it's comfortable to belong to something or someone if it sits well with you. If you get along well, don't violate each other's privacy. This is what Cooper Gates is saying here. What are your comments on that?
Absolutely. I mean, trust is absolutely essential. I was just having a great conversation with a group of women that I work with this morning. And I mean, some of these women are in their, 50s and 60s, and they are so broken now, and they don't want to open up because they don't trust the people that they're around. And in our group, it was a small group that we were working with. I think there were 6 of us there, and they were saying, this is the first group that I feel like I can actually be vulnerable to and trust. And I live, down in the South, and there's a whole lot of, bless your heart, going on down here a lot of times. And it can be really hard to find a group of people that you can trust. But what I find comforting in that is Brene Brown, if you've ever, heard of her and studied her things. I went through a year-long, 18-month-long program with her. It's so beautiful. But she said, the people that are your people, like your small list, your small circle, if you have a 1 inch by 1 inch piece of paper, they would be able to comfortably fit on there, right? So you don't need a plethora of people. You don't need all, your Instagram followers or even all of your family, as far as extended family or all of your friend group to know everything. You just need some certain small group of people that you can be completely open and honest with. But there absolutely has to be trust there. And when it is violated, it is sometimes near impossible to build back up. So something to just always be aware of within a friendship or relationship.
Very true. Now, you also mentioned vulnerability. What if someone has a fear to be vulnerable? What message do you have for that individual?
I think we all have a fear to be vulnerable. I mean, there's a few people out there that are just, word vomiters, and they just say things over and over and over, and everything, everyone knows everything. But their fear is to not be seen as well, just as the vulnerable person is, I don't want to be seen. And so, or I'm afraid to not be seen. So I want to, stay here. I want to hide. And so, vulnerability is one of the tools that is absolutely essential in order to build this foundation. And I help people build it in childhood, but there's also a group of people that I help, like I had to build it in adulthood. And the 4 tools that you need for this, one of them being vulnerability, but it is vision, it is discipline, it is vulnerability, and resilience. You cannot build a foundation of worth, esteem, and confidence without these 4 things. They are the tools in your tool belt every single day, every single moment. So vision, discipline, vulnerability, resilience. You need those, and they play off of and build off of one another as well.
Wow, absolutely amazing. Thanks for sharing. Now, Nellie, what is your best advice to the audience for walking with purpose and living a life of happiness?
Well, I am not a person that really advocates for happiness per se, because happiness, I mean, I have a 15-year-old, and let me tell you, what makes her happy at 5 o'clock is different than what makes her happy at 5:08 p.m. Right. And so happiness, it just fluctuates so often. But what I do really advocate for is spending time and discovering what brings you joy. Joy is grounding, happiness is fleeting. And so, what actually brings you that true guttural joy in your life? And that's going to take a lot of, self discovery. Get out there, think, journal, get to know, who you are and who you want to become. And that's where you're going to find that peace. And sometimes, what you can do is just look back and say, what are times in my life, even if just for a moment, that I felt true joy? And then use that as a stepping stool towards something else that's going to amplify that. So if, for me, I brought up, my husband and I renew our vows every 10 years. On our 10-year anniversary, that is just one of the memories that I have that was just true and utter raw joy right there, like visceral joy that I have right there. We were all six together. We were at the beach. We had nothing else to do that day but just be with one another. And so I can then take that and I can say, okay, let's create some events that are like that, because I know that I had true joy in that. So let's go to the beach, or let's just be all six together. Let's have a day of absolutely no plans except for just to fly by the seat of our pants and do that. So you can take what you know brings you joy and then take steps toward amplifying that.
I love it. Thank you, Nellie.
Mhm.
Now, you did receive another comment here as well. It says, homeschooling used to make little sense and get relegated to stereotypes of poor knowledge and little knowledge until almost everything we know got offered on the interwebs. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree, right? There is, you can homeschool 1,000 different ways. Literally, I would go to homeschool events, and there was just talking with other families there. They do it different. They do it different. They do it different. So there's so much flexibility and options and opportunities that are out there now. And now the script really has flipped to, oh, they're super smart and they do this and they do this. They're so accomplished. They must have been homeschooled, right? How funny is it that script flipped so much? But I was the type of homeschool parent that I was up at the board. I was up at the whiteboard. I was taking notes, and they were taking notes in there. And then we would do tests and, and quizzes. But we didn't do tests for probably the first 3 years, because it wasn't about, can you regurgitate? It was, let's discuss this and see how much you know, right? And then once we knew that we were going to start dripping back into a school environment, I was like, we should probably start a test so they don't go to school on day one in a couple of years and be like, what is this? And so we started doing some of those. But yes, there's a beautiful program. OutSchool is on there, and they have so many different classes that you can take, and from fishing to algebra to interpersonal to your chemistry classes and what have you. And yeah, I completely agree. It is a lot more mainstream today. There's groups that you can do field trips with. There's groups that you can co-teach with. There's co-ops. There's all sorts of things that you can do today. It's really impressive.
Wow, great advice. Thank you, Nellie.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any last words for the audience, Nellie?
Goodness, we covered such a multitude of topics tonight. I love it. My last words were just to know you're worthy, and to also know that everyone that you pass today and tomorrow and the next day is worthy. And so when you can, put those, so to speak, goggles on, it really changes your perspective. It takes you off the hierarchy, right? And it helps you serve others and love others the way that they deserve to be loved as well. And if they're going through a hard time, look below the behavior to see what's really happening there in order to help them, if there's someone that is, closer or intimate to you. But you are worthy, and so is everybody else.
Amen. You are worthy. Thank you so much, Nellie. Now, Nellie, where can the audience find you?
You can find everything of me on nellieharden.com. I would love to connect with you. Every Friday I send out and publish a new article. So you can sign up for that right on my website. There's downloads. There's all sorts of things that you can, all the books and everything you can get to on my website, including socials on Pinterest, what's it? Instagram. I was at interest, right? Pinterest, interest. No, Pinterest and Instagram, Facebook, all of that you can connect to through my website.
Thank you, Nellie. And thank you for being a guest on the Walk With Me podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure to check out Nellie on all of her social media platforms and also her website. That's nellieharden.com. And Nellie, thanks again for being a guest on the Walk With Me podcast. God bless.
Thank you so much for having me.